from IDEA?
One of the basic tenets of IDA, what's called a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. And that's a guarantee that every student has. I think the takeaways we can have is that we need to provide an appropriate education for our children in our congregation. We need to make modifications where modifications are needed. And we need to include these individuals in our classes and integrate them to the full extent that it's possible. At times, people say and boards say, well, it's a big expense to have one or two students with special needs in our religious schools. We really don't have the funds. Well, if they're a caring community, they'll find the funds and provide them. And so I can't overstress the importance of appropriateness of an education. We've got to learn to bend some of our rules, some of our traditions to accommodate individual children that have special needs. And at least in the Baltimore community, we do have some resources outside of our congregation through our Center for Jewish Education and another group called Shemish, which provides some assistance to our day schools and our supplemental schools. But the hardest thing is our parents, struggle 5 days a week with educating their children, and then they come to wanting a religious education for their child, and they come up with all kind of roadblocks, and they kind of just give up. They say, I've had enough. So we've got to make our houses of worship and our religious schools accommodating and encourage these individuals to participate and be part of our life.
Thank you, Ben. Rachel, I have some questions for you. How did you experience inclusion or a lack of inclusion as a young person?
So I had some religious school teachers who didn't quite get it, and I had some who did get it. And fortunately, I belong to a progressive Jewish community, and I was able to have a bat mitzvah. And I grew up with the expectation that I will have a bat mitzvah, I will attend Hebrew school and be confirmed. And there was no getting around that. Like me being deaf was not the reason not to do any of this. And for my bat mitzvah, I ended up having 2 Torah portions. Because it was Simchat Torah. So most kids got one Torah portion to prepare, and I had it in a holiday, just happened that way, and I ended up with 2 Torah portions. In my sexual education, I had some challenges from teachers who didn't think that it was possible for me to be deaf and to speak and to do as well as I did, to learn Hebrew, French, Russian, and I did all of that. Basically raised my own path.
That's awesome, Rachel. How does Judaism inform your approach and beliefs about inclusion?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. How does Judaism inform your approach and beliefs about inclusion?
So, Judaism is really focused. It's really focused on the person and the person's needs. And we have so many examples in our text about inclusion. And we all know that the Torah teaches we are all created in God's image. No, we are created B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image. And we are taught not to put a stumbling block before the blind, or to insult the deaf. But there is so much more than that, because the Torah also tells us we all stood at Sinai. We all received the commandments. And I interpret that to mean all of us who have disabilities and who don't. And then you have the rabbis of the Talmud who say that everyone has a place in the sun, that we should welcome everyone and do it joyfully. Then Maimonides said that everyone has the right, basically everyone's got the right to study Torah. Everybody has the obligation. So that's how I've approached my inclusion work in the Jewish community. It's based in our tradition.
Thank you.
It's based in tradition and doing the right thing, and also providing an individual or people what that person needs individually in order to belong, to be part of it, the community. So that's, yeah. I'm going to turn back to Ben. And one of the questions I have for you is, why is attitude a crucial element for inclusion?
Well, if you don't have a positive attitude to include individuals, we're never going to be accepting as individuals with disabilities. So we have to develop from the top down. We have to develop from the leadership, from our clergy to our board, have to take on the responsibility that we're going to move forward with a positive attitude and include individuals with disabilities. The thing is, do we, add a ramp? Do we add an automatic door to our congregation? Do we lower the mezuzah in our congregations to make things more accessible? Do we bring in a signer or a oral interpreter, as Rachel uses an oral interpreter because she never learned to sign? So we need to have effective communication for everybody. Having captioning on the Zoom call is terrific. We Zoom our services on Friday night and our high holiday services at Baltimore Hebrew Congregation, and we raised the issue, Rachel and I, that they need to be captioned. Well, it didn't take much for them to start captioning. So that was from the leadership and the understanding that you have to include all of our congregation members. Before that, Rachel used to get the sermons from the rabbis for the high holidays, and she had to promise she wouldn't read them until it was sermon time. And it kind of caught on that other people in the congregation couldn't hear, and when the sermons were over, they asked for the hard copy of the sermons from Rachel. So, if we create a positive image, and everybody has a place in the congregation, and we need to support that for our members who have disabilities and welcoming them to all of our activities.
advocacy is a bold proposition for sure. As a parent who became an advocate and now as a self advocate, I live with disabilities as well. Uh, it's important to know that if somebody requires an accommodation or asks or tells a congregation, somebody in the congregation, I need this to participate, to to we've gotten to this position where we have always had to come in kind of with our guns blazing, so to speak, not literally, but we need this, like we're trying to convince other people about our very human needs. So I'm going to ask you, Ben, about advocacy and why it's so critically important. And is it always going to be this way? Are we always going to need to advocate for the things that we or those we love need in their lives, just to be part of a faith community, just to belong?
Well, I guess it's going to be a never-ending process for advocating, because I don't know if our job is ever going to be done. Uh, when you're advocating, you've got to build positive alliances, again, with the leadership of your congregation. Um, you have to really, in the advocacy part, the individual with the disability needs to be his or her own advocate also. And you need, if you have a committee within your schools or your congregation, you need to include the individuals with disabilities on those committees. Uh, Nobody can tell you what it's like not to hear unless you're the individual who can hear, or the individual who has a mobility issue and is constantly in a wheelchair. Uh, you know, Unless you're in that position, you don't understand the the trials that that individual goes through every day to do something, to get to a restroom, to get inside a door. How many of our beamas in our country aren't accessible to people with disabilities? Baltimore Hebrew once hired a rabbi uh, who had polio as a child, and in order for him to get up to the ark, we had to put a handrail uh, in the sanctuary so he could hold on to it and get up to the ark. And so these are things that we have to think of constantly, and be advocates, so that individuals can be included in all of our conversations and our educational uh, areas and our adult education programs. Uh, One day, there was an individual mother came into our chapel for a Friday night service, and the individual started to act out, and I'm not sure what the diagnosis was, but individual started to talk loudly, and the mother was trying to control the child, and she finally took the child out, and I was ushering that night, and I went up to her and I said, you've got a place here, and go back and sit down, that the rest of the congregation has to learn to live with the issues that your child has. And so she came back many times on a Friday night to services, bringing her daughter. But advocacy, the only way we're going to push the rock is to advocate.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I also think that one of the signs of success is when someone in the congregation, and whether it's professional or a congregant, or leadership, when someone thinks on their own about inclusion and supporting somebody with a disability. But you're right. I think, advocacy is just such a key part of everything that we're doing. So thanks, Ben. Gabby.
Yes, we're gonna turn back to you, Rachel, and ask about your work can you tell us a little bit about what you do as Research and Data Analyst in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for the U.S. House of Representatives?
Sure. So I just started this new position after spending 20 years in the defense research field. So what I'm doing for the House is I'm helping to ensure that we have a diverse workforce in the House, and the way we do that is we gather the data about the demographics and the compensation as well of the employees in the House. And we've conducted a survey. We conducted one in 2019 before I came, and that's available on our website. And basically we provide this information to the public and to decision makers in the House. And we also, and another part of what we do in my office is we provide resources for both member officers who want to diversify their offices, their workforce. And we also prepare people who come to us, and we help them with their resumes, and we maintain a resume bank both for the Democratic and for the Republican sides. So we're a bipartisan office. So just so for my part, I'm shepherding the reports through and helping out with the analysis as well.
Thank you. So interesting.
Thank you.
So,
This is it. Oh, sorry, Gabby. I was going to say that this, Rachel, this is a new appointment for you too, as we were talking earlier.
Yes. Previously, I had been with the Institute for Defense Analysis, which is a federally funded research and development center in Alexandria, Virginia. And I was a research associate, and then I became a senior research associate, and I worked on various projects from medical defense against chemical and biological weapons, and nuclear non-proliferation. That's what I came to do. And then the last 4 years, I was involved with diversity and inclusion. Now, how to build an inclusive workplace in the armed forces. And I was involved with working on also workplace dynamics and sexual misconduct.
So we are going to invite everyone who has a question or a comment for Ben and Rachel. Now is the perfect time to put it into the chat box.
Any questions, just comments? Ben and Rachel have just so much experience and insight. So don't be shy, please. Not that we're putting anyone on the spot.
There's a question for me. Asking what our armed services doing to create a more inclusive workforce. Well, the Department of Defense has instituted a study on sexual assault, and just this morning I found out that a two-star general who had been in trouble for sexual assault, they're actually doing something about him, and I believe he's going to have some serious consequences. Finally, so this is the first general who will be facing consequences. Forces are also looking at how to improve the experiences of our female soldiers and female service members. And there's been a lot of talk about that, and because what happened at Fort Hood with the assault of the young woman who is unfortunately she was murdered, and so they conducted a whole investigation on that, which has rarely been done. So that's some of the things they're doing.
Sounds like there's
Right, why
more
don't you describe the issue about a deaf individual serving in the military service?
That, yes, right. That, so there was some legislation and stuff about 5 years ago directing the Air Force to have a pilot study and including enlisting people with hearing impairments, and that is something that we studied. Basically, the jury's still out on that, and that's a whole another case of worms. The bottom line is the United States military has a long way to go, and it's not easy to include people with disabilities because there are standards and for hearing and for mobility. And right now, there are no non-deployable military communities. So even if you are in the army band, you're an intelligence specialist, you're still liable to be deployed.
so many concerns, so many issues reflecting what's happening with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DE&I, in in society these days. It really is, and it's DE&I is really a big part now of where faith communities must be focused and thinking in that direction. So it's so great. Well, I want to thank you both for being here today, and we've just loved having you. And I'm sure we could be on for longer too. It's been great. So thank you. And we're really excited. We're going to move along here. We're just excited for our next guest on Everyone's Welcome. You're going to join us next time when we welcome Dr. Ann Masters on Thursday, May 6th at 1:30 Eastern Time. Ann and I have been friends and colleagues for over 15 years in our work at the intersection of interfaith inclusion, theology, and disability through the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, AAIDD. Our conversation will be about Ann's recent PhD dissertation, Who Do You Say That I Am? Overcoming the Marginalization of Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities in the U.S. Catholic Church. And Ann is currently the director of the Office of Pastoral Ministries with Persons with Disabilities for the Archdiocese of Newark. One of the things that I'm really excited about in this work that Ann has been doing, and her dissertation was completed last summer. So It's very, very recent information. And she explores Judeo-Christian theology and disability and informing how particular focuses on the Catholic Church in the US, but a lot of what she is sharing has so much value to any faith community, anybody interested also in hearing a bit about theology and other aspects of living with a disability. Anne is an international speaker, and we really look forward to welcoming her again Thursday, May 6th at 1:30 Eastern, 12:30 Central, and the rest of the times are up on the screen. Gabby.
Thank you, Shelly, and thank you again, Ben and Rachel, and for everyone for being with us. Wanted to take a moment to mention about the new children's book that I wrote and collaborated with my friend and colleague Robin Matthews in My Kahila, which is a book about friends with disabilities. It's available from Jewish Learning Venture. It supports our work with whole community inclusion. And when we send out the recording for this episode, I'll be sure to send the link. Those of you who purchased the book, they are in the mail. If you haven't received yours yet, you should this week. We're really excited to get it out in the world. And Shelly and I are both authors. Our books are there. They're available wherever you purchase your books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, Target.com. We will notify everyone who's registered when the webinar episode will be available on the jkidaccess.org website, where you can find all of our episode archives. And please be sure to reach out to Shelly and me. Here are all the places you can find us: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, email. We're just always happy to connect and to learn more about you and your community. And again, just a great big thank you to Ben and Rachel for spending time and for sharing with us today. And to all of you who are watching or are watching the recording or watching on Facebook, we invite you to share everyone's welcome and help us spread the word, and hopefully to the whole world. Tell your friends and colleagues, stay safe and be well.
Thanks, everybody.